All right, so we're going to get started on these notes. We're not going to complete the whole part. We're just going to be talking about graphing linear equations, and we'll work on the rest of it in a different video. So the first thing, let's go ahead and start off with our vocabulary as usual. A linear function is basically, remember functional notation, we talked about that last time, is how we write the equation of our line in functional notation. So remember, a linear equation we always say is y equals mx plus b. So when we talked about functional notation in the last lesson, we said you can take some values of x and you can plug it into the equation over here and calculate your y value when you get out. That's really what's happening. This is just being replaced with y. So we just changed it to its functional notation in order to plug and chug values in. It means the same thing. Okay, so this is a function whose graph is a line. And this is a written representation or it is an equation whose graph is a line. Okay, so one is a function, f of x, and one is equation, y equals. Okay, the dependent variable and the independent variable, this is important. We'll talk about this a lot as we move on and start looking at different kinds of graphs and different functions. The dependent variable is the y value, and it's going to depend. So remember when we were plugging in all those numbers into our functional notation, what the y value equal depended on what we were plugging in for x. So the y value depends on what the x value is. So whenever you're trying to decide which one's dependent, which one's independent, just try to remember that. The y is going to depend on what we choose as our value of x. So the independent variable is our x value. We can decide whatever we want to use as our x. So we can decide what to use. It doesn't depend on anything. Okay. So graphing a linear equation. We're going to talk about a couple of strategies. Strategy number one is plug and chug. So again, here's that plug and chug term you've heard me say before. And that is where we're just going to choose values for x. Okay. And then we're going to calculate what y equals. So you do that by sort of creating this chart. Okay, so when x is this amount, plug it in and see what y is. So we're going to plug it into the 2/3 x plus 3. And we're going to decide what our y value is. So remember, when you're going to choose numbers to plug in here, be really smart about this. There's a fraction in here. So you want to choose values of x that are divisible by 3. Okay, divisible by 3. So we're going to do -3, 0, and 3. Why do I want divisible by 3? Because I want to eliminate that fraction. We don't like fractions. We want to try to eliminate them. So let's do that. So we're going to get 2/3 times -3 plus 3. So these guys are going to cancel. -2 plus 3 is going to give me 1. Okay. Then we're going to choose 0. So 2/3 times 0 plus 3. 0 times anything is 0, crosses out, and we get 3. And then we're going to do 2/3 times +3 plus 2. The 3's are going to cancel. 2 plus 2 is 4. So my ordered pairs are -3, 1, 0, 3, and over 3 and up 4. And so I just would take my ruler then and connect. Please pretend that's a straight line. Notice I've connected them all the way to the ends of my graph, and I've put arrows on the end because this is a linear equation. It's going to continue on in both directions forever and ever, and I want it to look good. So I'm going to make it nice and straight with my ruler and put arrows on both sides. So that's our first strategy for graphing a linear equation. It's picking values for x and then plugging it into that part and telling what y is equal to. The second strategy is to use the x and y intercepts. And this strategy isn't always easy, and the reason for that is sometimes you're dealing with fractional answers that are really bizarre and difficult to use. So what you're going to do is when you're looking for the x-intercept, they're saying, remember, if it's an x-intercept, it has to be somewhere on this line, right? It has to cross the x-axis. That means its y value is going to be 0. So x, 0. Y would have to be 0. And in the y-intercept, the x would have to be 0 because it has to cross on this y somewhere, which means left or right is going to be 0. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to go up and down. So what is this telling you? It's telling you that if you're looking for the x-intercept, you are going to plug 0 in for y and chug. Get the value. When you want the y-intercept, you're going to plug 0 in for x and chug. Counterintuitive. When you're looking for x, plug 0 in for y. The opposite. When you're looking for y, plug 0 in for x. So let's do this. You have to do it two ways. This one we're going to look for the x, and this one we're going to look for the y. So if I'm looking for x, I'm going to plug 0 in for y. And then I'm going to chug. I'm going to solve. I'm trying to get x by itself. Subtract 2. If you do that from one side of the equation, you do it from the other. -2 equals 4x. Then you're going to get x by itself by dividing by 4. If you do that to one side of the equation, you do it to the other. I can simplify that. My x-intercept is -1/2. So it's going to cross the x-axis at -1/2. Okay? Now let's try to figure out where it's going to cross the y-axis. So I have here -1/2, 0. That's my x-intercept. Okay, now let's look for the y-intercept. If I'm looking for y, I plug 0 in for x. 0 plus 2, y equals 2. So when x is 0, y is 2. That means it's crossing the y-axis at 2. And so again, if you use your ruler, there you go. So you find where it crosses the x, where it crosses the y, and you connect the two, and that gives you where your line is on the coordinate board, graphing a line using the intercepts to help you figure out where it's at. Okay, so one more strategy to talk about. Let me go ahead and scroll my page up. And we're going to talk about the third strategy, which is using the slope-intercept form. So graphing a line using the slope-intercept form. So remember that slope-intercept is y equals mx plus b. This number, positive or negative, is the y-intercept. So that's where it crosses the y-axis. So you go to that point, you place your dot, and then this is your slope. So that's going to tell you the slant of your line. Is it going up? Is it going down? And by how much? Okay, so we can go ahead and use that strategy. First, find B and graph it. Okay. Second, find M, the slope, and then graph it. So looking at this line, here's B, +2. So I'm going to go on my y-intercept at +2. That's where my line is crossing. Now from this point I have to decide, is my line going to be steep? Is it going to be flatter? Is it going to be going in the negative direction? So you first find that intercept point and then you decide the steepness of your line, okay? So let me get rid of that because we don't need all of that on there. I'm just making my point about the fact that you first find the intercept and then you decide how steep your line is. So it's crossing right here at 2. And now this is my slope. And what that is telling me, since it's negative, means that my line is falling from left to right. So my line is going to be going in the negative direction, okay? 1/3 means, right, it's a negative, and this is the rise over the run. So I'm going down 1 because it's not rising, it's falling because it's negative. So it's down 1, and then I'm going to run 3. You always run left to right. That's like how you read. So down 1, and then over 1, 2, 3. Down 1, and over 1, 2, 3. You should at least do that a couple of times before you, whoa, let me try that again. Before you use your ruler, I'm just freehanding this. Okay, so you're going to just try your very, very best to make a nice straight line with your ruler, and then you're going to put your arrows on both ends. So that is our lesson on graphing linear equations. You've learned 3 different ways to graph: plug and chug. You've learned using the intercept forms, and you've also learned using the slope-intercept form. So your intercepts, slope-intercept form, and plug and chug.